I lift my eyes to the hills. From whence cometh my help? Psalm 121, verse 1. Now, people have sometimes observed, what was he looking to the hills for? His help wasn't likely to come from there. And that's very true, but it's a step in the right direction, because he went on to say, my help cometh from the Lord who made heaven and earth. In other words, who made those hills. If he hadn't lifted his eyes in the first place, he may never have realized that God would be the source of his help, and better still, that help would be coming. The rest of the psalm is him recording all the benefits that God could provide and would provide, not least of all to be the shade on his right hand. Standing in the midst of some unnamed difficulty, the psalmist gazes afar off to the hills. The biblical expression is, he lifted up his eyes. It was then that he looked farther still to the Creator enthroned in eternity beyond the hills, with the result that he became aware that the Creator King was right there beside him, as close as his own shadow. When he moved, the King moved. Where he went, the King went. But it all began when he lifted up his eyes. It wasn't the answer, but it was a crucial step in the right direction. The sages of Israel taught that if a sick person turned his face to the wall, it was a bad omen. He would die. And today we speak of body language. A depressed person who has lost hope is downcast. He looks down to the ground. It's a bad sign, because it indicates that the person has ceased to believe that things can change, that help can come. We all occasionally become downcast, and we find it difficult, if not impossible, to hear God at those times. Now, the psalmist was in such a place. He needed help, and he lifted up his eyes. He was in trouble, but he had hope. His spirit may have been in confusion and anxiety, but he would use his body as a prayer. He lifted up his eyes, saying in effect, I'm listening, I'm expecting, I'm looking for the answer. And God, as promised, didn't fail him. But it all started with the man doing what he could. He lifted up his eyes. He didn't wait for God to force him out of the gloom. He showed himself ready and willing. He did what little he could. Nebuchadnezzar sent himself insane because of his pride, but he did something critical to his healing. Daniel writes this, quote, and at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes to heaven. There it is again. And mine understanding returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him. That's Daniel 4:34. He was not a good man who deserved to receive God's help, but God is plenteous in mercy. Amen. When Abraham had left his home and travelled to a distant country, God said to him, lift up now thine eyes, Genesis 13:14. And Abraham saw that the land in which he stood was being given to him and his descendants. He lifted up his eyes. Another time, he was sitting at the door of his tent one day, probably deep in thought. Then he, quote, lifted up his eyes, and he saw 3 men, angels, standing before him. That's Genesis 18, verse 2. Now, I just wonder if they had been standing there for some time and needed Abraham to lift up his eyes at last and see them. Jacob couldn't see much of a future for himself, serving his deceitful and avaricious uncle Laban. And God told him, lift up your eyes. And he saw that the speckled and striped sheep and goats were more vigorous than the others, and this was to be the answer to his dilemma. Genesis 31, verse 12. And Balaam tried numerous times to curse Israel, but acknowledged God's unshakable blessing of them when he lifted up his eyes. Numbers 24, verse 2. Jesus' favourite greeting was, cheer up. Cheering up was not the answer, but it's the equivalent of lifting up your eyes, and it's a good step in the right direction. And God sees it as a prayer, an eloquent prayer. The one who gets the answer is the one who's expecting it. Lift up your eyes. Hope to see you in the next video.